Hey, good afternoon everybody. Today I'm going to show you how to make bread for sandwiches. You could just use this as a regular loaf of bread. The reason I call it this because it comes out just nice when you slice it, and it makes excellent sandwiches. It's a pretty basic bread recipe. Here's the list of ingredients. Depending on what day it is and how humid it is and all kinds of things, the amount of flour is approximate. I start with a little over 4 cups. Okay, and I'll just ditch that right into my mixer, and as with any bread product, you can just put this in a regular bowl and knead it by hand, in which case you'd make a well in the bottom and put your liquid ingredients and just work in the flour until you turn it out on the counter. I'm just doing this in here because I've got it. You just put the salt in the flour directly and just mix that on low while you get your yeast ready. As I've said in other dough recipes, I do not measure the water temperature with a thermometer. I simply put my finger under the tap and I get it as hot as possible, that I don't go ow ow when I stick my fingers under the tap, and that seems to be just the right temperature because the cup is going to absorb some heat, the bowl is going to absorb some heat and cool it down a bit. And if you start at the correct temperature on the thermometer and then let it cool down, your bread's going to take a lot longer to rise. Okay, so I've got my water, and I'll put the sugar in first. I put both tablespoons right in the water. That accelerates the yeast at the beginning. Now I'm putting in 5 teaspoons of yeast, which is the equivalent, I always use bulk, that's the equivalent of 2 packets of the stuff you get at the store. So I'm just going to mix that up. While you're stirring the yeast into the warm water, it'll start frothing up. As long as you get most of it stirred in, that's fine. Then you can look at heating up your milk. Now I don't do this on the stove. I just, about a half a minute in the microwave does it. You just want to warm it up. Well, it's only been a few minutes. As you can see, the yeast is live, which is good to see. So, I'm being sarcastic. That's amazing yeast. Okay, so the milk is just warm. I put my pinky in to feel it. It's great. Now, this seems self-evident. If for whatever reason you put a finger in to the yeast to scrape off the spoon with a clean finger, never lick your finger, because that stuff will keep growing inside your gut and give you the worst kind of gas you've ever had in your life. Trust me on that. Okay, because I think every baker who's started out has foolishly done that at some point. So don't do that. It's kind of like putting your hand on the stove with bread, you know? Okay. So toss that all in. See how nice and fluffy that is there? Even stuck to the dough hook. Perfect. So I cracked the egg in the bowl just in case there's any eggshell, because if you're going to have to pick out eggshell, you want to do it in a little container like this. You don't want to be getting in there. Okay, so toss that in and start it on low. There's enough liquid in there, you can turn it up a notch right away. What you want to do is just make sure it's not kicking out flour out the side like that. Yeah, I'll turn it down a bit for now. So this is where you want to check it. Yeah, that's looking pretty wet, and that stuff at the bottom is pretty dry. So at some point you're going to have to put it on the counter. You know, you can always let it fall back like that and try it again to see if you'll pick up all the dried bits first, because the less flour you have to incorporate at this point, the lighter and fluffier your bread will be. it's starting to spit things out of the bowl, so that's my side. So I've got another, I'd say about 1/4 to 1/2 a cup. I'll just put some on the counter. You never want to turn out bread dough on a dry counter because it'll stick. And if you flour up your hands first before you get it out, it makes it a lot easier too. And see, all that came out. That's good. Now we're going to be putting it back in here with some parchment, so I'll just leave that for now. What you want to do is very lightly pick it up, turn it over, and you're going to knead it on the counter just for a couple of minutes. While you do this, you can feel that there's some very wet pieces and some dry, hard pieces. And you're doing two things with the kneading. You're distributing the moisture in the dough, and you're also developing the gluten, which you need for good bread. Okay, so I've got it feeling pretty good, but it is sticking to my hands. That's what I was telling you, the amount is, and it's picked up everything off the counter. So I will put a bit more because I want to go at it for a few more minutes. And if you're not sure how to knead bread dough, do what I'm doing. Pick it up, push it down, turn it around, and again. Now if you're in a really bad mood, yeah, you can pick it up and throw it, but that's more for theater than actual bread making. Though it is fun once in a while. If you had a really bad day at work, you can like punch it too, you know. And in your kneading, give it a squeeze. And if you're feeling any hard lumps from the mixer, make sure those are all rubbed out or squeezed out. Okay, so the end point for this is when it's barely sticking to your hands, but if you just stop for a minute and you rub it, it does feel smooth. If you put too much flour in it, it's going to interfere with the rise, and you're going to end up with a tough, dry loaf. Some recipes will call for you to oil the loaf or the bowl, or use plastic wrap. And yeah, plastic wrap seems handy, but a lot of the dough will stick to it. Parchment paper, however, has magical properties that you can peel the dough right off it after. So make a little nest with the parchment paper, and then just kind of try not to catch the paper, just drop it straight in there. Okay? And I've got plates that fit the bowl just right. If you're going to use a cloth, use a damp cloth, and just leave it to rise for at least an hour, probably an hour and a quarter, hour and a half. Because this is a one rise bread, you're just going to punch it down and make your loaves after. It's been a little over an hour, and I'd say that's ready. It's lifted right off. You can see it's very fluffy and everything. So what you're going to do, first of all, is take this and just put a bit of flour on your hands so you don't get stuck to it, and just punch it down. Now take this out. And put it on the counter. And see, you see with the parchment, look at that, isn't that nice? Just peels right off. None of the dough sticks to it. Nothing is lost. Now, you're not going to need too much flour into this, but what you definitely want to do is you want to knead all the big bubbles out. If you've ever bought a loaf of bread at the store and you had a huge hole in the middle, that's why. Because this will form quite a few bubbles while it's rising. Oops, there was one. And you want to just make sure that you've got all those. You can actually just squeeze it with your fingers. Oh, there goes another one. as long as it's not sticking to the counter. And it's pretty smooth right now, it's nice. You can actually hear those breaking, little whistles coming out of the bread. So once you've gotten all the bubbles out, the big bubbles, there's always going to be some that makes the crumb. Preheat your oven to 375 Fahrenheit. Get your bread pans. Now for these, I know some recipes say butter them and flour them and all that good stuff. Personally, I just get a little bit of flour and manually rub it around the inside, because I am using non-sticks after all. If you have old bread pans, by all means butter them before you flour them. And even this is not really necessary with good non-sticks. So what you're going to do is you're going to rise these again in the pans. Get the sharpest knife that you own. For me, that's a boning knife. Now, you can weigh these if you want, and I'm going to be very careful to not cut into my countertop and use a very light pressure here. So what you do is just cut it in half. Now, I used to subscribe to that notion that you had to roll them up and make loaves and all that, and all I ended up doing is getting really dry bread. Okay, so that's what the crumb looks like on the inside, which is great. So then you just take your loaf, grab a pan, flop it in, and press it down into the corners. Again, I used to avoid things like this, figuring it would disfigure the loaf. But guess what? You're rising it in your pans again. So no, it doesn't. If you push it down into the corners and kind of stretch it out, it'll rise a lot better in the pan than if you roll it up or stuff like that, because then you'll get like empty corners at the sides and it just comes out funny. This is how you get that nice even shape that you can use to make sandwiches after. So if I've done this right, after it rises and bakes, not only should it be this really nice rectangle that just looks like the store, it will also fit in sandwich bags to make sure it stays soft and doesn't dry out. So there's the crumb on the other one. And if you want to, before, you can kind of pull it into a square. Flop that in. Nice and even. And I do not use any type of wash on these, because you actually want the crust to get dark so you can slice it better after. Got my pans ready. I'm just going to cover it very lightly with a piece of parchment and wait for the oven to heat up and wait for them to rise up in the pans. Probably for about a half an hour. Been half an hour, oven's hot. This is lifted up, look at that, nice and even. It's pretty good. So they're going in just like that there. Yeah, try not to bang them around, you don't want to lose your rise, and I'll just pop them in the oven and set it for 45 minutes. I just popped these out of the oven. They're looking pretty good. I'm just going to bring them over to the cooling rack quick. It's tempting to just grab the loaves, but you'll burn yourself. Just remember to use your gloves. They're really hot. Okay, turn that right side up so it doesn't get dented. But while I've got one in my hand so you can see how nice that looks just like the stuff from the store. Okay, so just let it sit there and cool off. Because no matter how good it smells or tempting it is to cut it right now, until it cools down enough that the crumb inside sets, no matter how sharp your knife is, it's just going to wreck the bread and it's just going to kind of shrink down and compress. So we'll just let those cool off for a while. They're all cooled off, and if you notice, I did put one in the paper bag. The reason for this is it will help. I'll put it in a plastic bag overnight. It will help to soften up the crust, which will dry out if you just leave it open to the air. This one is going to be looking good with toast and jam tonight. This one is going to be sandwiches tomorrow. Alright, so I am going to cut this one open just so you can see. And I'll just cut the end off. Yeah, even now it's a little too soft. It should dry out more. But I'm going to want to eat some of this tonight. Yeah, when it dries out enough, it does not do this ragged cut thing which I was explaining earlier. This is what happens if you cut it when it's too wet. But that's still looking pretty fine, you know. Try one more slice there. Yeah, that's got a really good crumb. It's got a nice look to it, and it cuts well. So that's how I make sandwich bread, and I do hope you give this a shot. It's a nice, easy recipe, and thanks for watching, and hope to see you again.